Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 6 of ARBinBRIEF, a practical video guide on handpicked arbitration issues. My name is Iuliana Iancu, and I'm one of the founders of ARBinBRIEF. ARBinBRIEF videos, in collaboration with 𝗔𝗥𝗕𝗙𝗏, Delos dispute resolution, and Mundi, offer a quick resource to consult on issues that arise in international arbitration, as well as showcasing talented arbitrators in an interview format. Over the course of 10 episodes in the first series of ARBinBRIEF, we are moving through the life cycle of an arbitration. Having nominated the arbitrators, held the case management conference, discussed the drafting of PO1 and the organization of hearings via video conference, today our speakers will discuss how they approach bifurcation as arbitrators. I am very honored to introduce you today to our two highly accomplished international arbitrators. Joining us from Paris, our interviewee today is Celine Greenberg, arbitrator and counsel, founding partner at Meyer Greenberg International Arbitration. And joining from London, our interviewer is Dr. Emilia Onyema, professor of international commercial law at the School of African Studies and at the University of London. For those of you who are joining us live, the 15-minute interview will be followed by a 15-minute Q&A session. Please send any questions that you have following today's interview via the Q&A section in Zoom. Now it's over to you, Celine and Emilia.
Thank you very much, Iuliana. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon from Celine and myself. We'll go straight into the interview. Celine, could you please help us understand what we mean by bifurcation and whether the terminology we use is accurate?
Great. Thank you, Emilia. Thank you, Iuliana. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be having discussions with you today. So the term bifurcation of proceedings refers to the practice of splitting the proceedings in different phases, each dealing with separate issues and resulting in a partial award. So bifurcation really is something of a misnomer because proceedings can be divided in more than two phases. For example, the proceedings can be divided into phases on jurisdiction, liability, quantum, cost. So the term really isn't perfect. And sometimes you can see the term trifurcation, and it's not much better, and it means exactly the same. The point is to have the best, most efficient procedure for the dispute.
Perfect. And I completely agree with that. And so how do you, in your own practice, how do you implement bifurcation?
Right. So I think it's important to think about the legal basis for doing so. Most of the time, the arbitration rules are silent, but they will provide for general powers given to the arbitral tribunal to decide procedural issues. So that gives the tribunal a lot of flexibility. In my experience, when the issue arises, it depends on what the parties want. Sometimes they ask for a procedural order. And so in that case, I will decide and order bifurcation in a procedural order if it's disputed. And often I need to give reasons. But sometimes that's not necessary and neither party wants an order and you can simply implement bifurcation or not in the procedural timetable. It's very flexible.
Great, and I do agree. And in my own practice, if there is no provision in the rules, it's something we can raise during the preliminary hearing to be sure that we avert parties' minds to that. So carrying on with your practice, when do you think that bifurcation is appropriate?
So there's no general rule, but generally speaking, splitting the proceeding is useful when it creates efficiency, meaning either it saves a long and costly debate on the next phases if you end up not needing the next phases, or if the next phases can be more efficient. For example, you obtain access to more evidence in between. But you also need to keep in mind that in all cases, bifurcation will result in longer proceedings, and most of the time it will be more costly if you proceed to the next phase. And you need to consider whether you will gain anything by splitting because sometimes if the issues are intertwined, there's really no efficient splitting that is possible. And to give you a concrete example from my practice, where a respondent argues that it is not a proper party to a contract, including an arbitration agreement, well, the issues on jurisdiction and the merits are going to be the same. So it would be really difficult to split efficiently. And what you need to think about essentially is whether you run a risk of inadvertently deciding something in the first phase that will constrain your decision or influence your decision in the second phase. And that would be a burden for you later on if you do go to the next phase. Or sometimes you will decide something on, say, for example, jurisdiction, and then learn something new in the next phase on the merits that causes you to think again about your jurisdictional decision. So that's why it's quite complex, actually, because every case is different and requires an in-depth analysis.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on that. The tribunal is trying to ensure that they do not prejudge the issues before they have been fully addressed. And so now that you've raised the point around jurisdictional objections, I'm wondering, what do you take into account, whether you take into account the soundness of the objections when you decide on bifurcation?
Now, that is a great question, because actually that's the most difficult part. Of course, in theory, you're not supposed to prejudge the merits of the objections or to take a procedural decision in respect of that objection. However, when you're trying to balance the risk and benefits of a bifurcation, it's almost inevitable that you come to consider the likelihood that bifurcation will be useful, and therefore the likelihood that it creates more efficiency. And that is the same, essentially, as assessing the prima facie validity of the objection. So if the objection appears to be frivolous, of course, it would be really unfair to the claimant to delay the arbitration and cause a longer proceedings by ordering bifurcation. And the reverse also applies. If the objection appears to be well-founded, well, it would be really unfair to cause the respondent to incur the cost of arguing on the merits. And it really argues in favor of bifurcation. So there's, to be really honest with you, there is a bit of hypocrisy there, because officially you cannot prejudge, but you have to.
I like that. And you keep talking about, you keep mentioning the word efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. I think that's really at the forefront of the tribunal when they're faced with these questions. And so looking at Article 14.4 of the Delos rules, it defines the concept of a time notice. And so can you share with us your thoughts on how an arbitrator can approach this in deciding the best procedure to deal with the issues raised by the parties?
Sure. Well, so to start with the first part of your question about efficiency, I think it's really important to consider it's a very wide concept, and a lot of people reduce it to time and cost. And it can include actually other factors, such as the easiest way for the tribunal to address the issues, the pace of other related proceedings, or other relevant factors, such as access to evidence, which may not be already in front of the tribunal, but is necessary to deal with the first phase or phase 2. And so all of that counts. But of course, time is sometimes of the essence, often for parties, and therefore mechanisms such as the time notice in the Delos rules are really helpful, because they are essentially in the parties' interest and in the tribunal's interest. For the parties, a time notice basically provides predictability as to when they are going to receive the award, and parties love predictability. We all do in our lives. But it's also helpful for the tribunal because also they enjoy the predictability, it helps them organize, and it also applies sometimes, in many cases, a fair amount of pressure, time pressure, and we all know that we perform better under pressure, so we should all welcome these mechanisms.
Yeah, as lawyers, we like that. Then again, in practice, how often is bifurcation used in international arbitration?
So that's really difficult to answer. And I guess you need to distinguish between commercial arbitration and investment arbitration. In commercial arbitration, it's very difficult to make any sort of statistics because every case is very different. Many cases are confidential. And even if you could make statistics, they would have really limited value. But in investment arbitration, it's very different. A lot of cases are public and arbitrators look at what other tribunals have done to come to their decisions. So it's really relevant to look at the trend and the practice. And there you can see that it has become the norm to bifurcate jurisdiction from liability and quantum. And there is very good reason for that, because in investment arbitration, jurisdiction, which is of course a dispositive issue, is always contested. And the jurisdictional debate is always complex, takes time and effort on the part of the parties and the tribunal, and it's very costly. And since respondent states are funded by public money, it really makes sense to be very conservative in terms of the potential waste of time and cost. And of course, in most cases, jurisdictional issues such as the definition of investment or investor in a particular treaty is quite distinguishable from the merits issues of whether there has been an expropriation or not. That said, the systematic use of bifurcation in investment arbitration, should cause us to reflect as to whether it's really right. There may be better options sometimes, at least in theory. But to be honest with you, in my practice, I've never seen an investment case where jurisdiction and the merits were heard together, or where that was a bad thing to have bifurcated. I've seen one interesting case where the bifurcation of jurisdiction was not requested by the respondent state at the case management conference when the procedural timetable was discussed. But the request did come during the preparation of the statement of defense. And of course, it was a shame that the request was made at this stage because the claimant had already produced its statement of claim on jurisdiction and merits and quantum, and had incurred all that cost. And the procedural timetable had been fixed in consideration of the fact that the parties would deal with everything. But the tribunal, considered very carefully and eventually came to the conclusion that it was better to bifurcate even in those circumstances, and turned out to be the right decision because later down the line, the tribunal declined jurisdiction. And so the time and cost of arguments on the merits and quantum was saved.
Yeah. That's an excellent example on which to end our very brief discussion, clarifying to our listeners what bifurcation means and where we are at with that, the considerations that the tribunal takes into account, and the fact that efficiency and ultimately due process are issues that weigh heavily on the tribunal's mind. I'll hand over back to Iuliana.
Thank you so much, Celine and Emilia, for this very insightful discussion. I'm sure that we will be hearing a lot, especially about how to walk this delicate balancing act between deciding a procedural case management issue and not really touching too much on the merits, whilst at the same time being guided by what the tribunal thinks is the correct solution for the merits of the case. So we would, at the end of this episode, we would like to thank our partner organizations, ArbitralWomen, Delos Dispute Resolution, and Mundi for their invaluable support. Delos Dispute Resolution is an independent arbitral institution established in 2014. Mundi provides arbitration research tools for lawyers, including a directory of more than 5,000 profiles with arbitrator analytics. ARBItrapledge establishes concrete and actionable steps to increase the number of women appointed as arbitrators with the ultimate goal of full parity. We are also happy to say that season 1 of ARBinBRIEF is supported by ArbitralWomen, Careers in Arbitration, and the Rising Arbitrators Initiative. For those of you watching us over YouTube, our video ends here. Thank you for joining us. To see future ARBinBRIEF episodes on handpicked arbitration issues, please follow us on LinkedIn and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'd also love to hear your comments and your feedback, and you can register on our website for the next episode. The website is www.arbinbrief.com, and we look forward to seeing you there.